I once started very seriously. I prepared a plan, set alarms, wrote down goals. On the first day, I did everything properly. On the second day, I was still trying. Then, by the third day, I started negotiating with myself. I sat there, staring at the clock, phone in hand, thinking, today is too busy. I can make it up tomorrow. The stick man in my head nodded, pulled the blanket up, and pushed the important task to the familiar tomorrow. The most uncomfortable part wasn't quitting. It was the feeling that I knew I was going to quit, but pretended not to see it. I hated that moment of promising myself on Sunday night, only to quietly betray myself a few days later. Have you tried many times, only to stop at that exact same point every time? And deep inside, are you asking yourself a painful question? Maybe I really don't have discipline like other people? And the important thing is, this is not your fault. You are not weak. You do not lack willpower. You are not less disciplined than anyone else. The real problem lies here. You are trying to use willpower to fight the way the brain is designed. Your brain is always trying to conserve energy, always leaving room for negotiation, always keeping an escape route when things become uncomfortable. But there is a system that has existed for hundreds of years where this negotiation never happens. In Japanese Zen, it is called Guji, continuous practice without gaps. Why can Zen monks wake up at the same time every day, practice for a lifetime, and never miss a session? Not because they are stronger than you, but because they completely removed the option of whether to do it or not from the brain. And modern science is beginning to confirm this. I used to think that as long as I was determined enough, everything would be different. That if I truly wanted it, I would do it. But then I realized an uncomfortable truth. The brain does not operate on desire. It operates on identity. It does not ask what you want to do. It asks who you are. In Japanese Zen monasteries, when someone enters the path of practice, they do not say, I will try to meditate every day. They stand before the community and declare themselves a Zen practitioner. That moment is not a promise. It is an identity shift. From that second on, practice is no longer a choice. It is a given, like breathing or standing up when the bell rings. Modern science is beginning to see this clearly. Behavioral studies at Harvard University show that when a commitment is made public, the primitive brain interprets failure as a social threat. For hundreds of thousands of years of evolution, losing status in the group meant being excluded. Your brain still carries that survival mechanism. That is why quitting in silence is easy. But quitting when everyone is watching becomes more painful than continuing. This is why silent promises die so quickly. When no one knows, the brain always keeps an exit door open. But when you write it down, sign it, tell other people, you are no longer just pursuing a habit. You are protecting your self-image. And at that point, motivation no longer comes from emotion, but from identity. You do not need to become stronger. You need to become consistent with the person you have declared yourself to be. And when identity changes, behavior is forced to follow. After making a public commitment, I realized that another battle was still quietly happening every day. Not the question of whether to do it or not, but a seemingly harmless question. When? Morning or evening? Before or after eating? Today or tomorrow? Each time, my brain had to spend energy making a decision, and it only took a little fatigue for that decision to lean toward procrastination. Japanese Zen monks understand this very well. That is why they do not look for the ideal time. They choose a fixed hour and lock it in. No negotiation, no adjustment. When the bell rings, they get up. No emotion, no motivation. When I did the same thing, everything started to change. Not because I liked waking up earlier, but because I removed time from the list of variables. My brain no longer had room to argue, no reasons to bargain. the body gradually learned a new rhythm, like a reflex. Order is not established to optimize performance, but to end hesitation. And when is no longer a question, action happens almost automatically. I no longer needed to force myself. I simply acted when it was time. Even after the time was fixed, I realized my brain still hadn't surrendered. It just changed tactics. Instead of asking when, it began whispering a more subtle question. What will we do today? And I naively thought flexibility was good, that changing things slightly would make it less boring, that following my feelings would make everything feel more natural. But reality was the opposite. Every time I changed the content of the practice, my brain was given a new power, the power of choice. And wherever there is choice, there is negotiation. Meditate this morning or read, or maybe do a few stretches to wake up, 10 minutes or 20, a familiar book or a new one. These small questions sound harmless, but they are exactly the cracks through which old habits quietly crawl back in. I began to accept a hard truth. Variety doesn't kill motivation. It kills consistency. The brain doesn't get tired from doing work. It gets tired from deciding. Every small choice consumes energy. And when energy drops, instinct pulls me back to the most familiar path, skipping, shortening, or doing it tomorrow. In Zen practice, there is a principle that makes many modern people uncomfortable. Do one thing, in one way, every day, for a long enough period of time. No creativity, no personalization, no following your feelings. Repeat until the mind has no reason left to resist. That is the moment when the ego that wants to control everything begins to dissolve. I tried applying this. I locked everything in. The same sequence of actions, the same order, the same duration, no changes no matter the mood, whether I felt excited or bored, energetic or exhausted, inspired or empty. There was no special version for today, only one single path. The first days were truly uncomfortable, not because the actions were hard, but because my mind had its playground taken away. It protested constantly. It told me I was becoming robotic. It said life needed flexibility. It warned I would soon get bored and quit if I kept repeating things like this. But I started to understand. That wasn't the voice of wisdom. It was the voice of an ego afraid of losing control. By the third week, the resistance became strongest. My brain screamed for change, for a little freedom. And right there, something strange began to happen. When I didn't give in, when I gave it no choices at all, that voice grew weaker. It didn't disappear immediately, but it became quieter, less convincing. Then one morning I realized I had started without deciding. My body automatically entered the familiar sequence of actions. No forcing, no countdown, no self-talk. I just did it, like tying your shoes or brushing your teeth. You don't think about it, you don't debate, you just do it because that's how it always happens. That was when I understood the true nature of discipline. It is not the ability to force yourself to do hard things. It is the ability to design a path so narrow that you cannot step off it. When there is only one option left, the brain has no reason to resist. And when the brain stops resisting, action becomes almost frighteningly light. A single path does not take away your freedom. It frees you from inner chaos. Because in the end, what exhausts us is not doing the same thing every day. It is having to decide again every day who we are. After a period of repeating without change, I noticed something very strange. I was no longer maintaining discipline. I was simply acting. Not because I was trying harder, but because my brain had stopped participating in the debate. The familiar sequence of behaviors was activated before conscious thought even appeared. Neuroscience explains this very clearly. When an action is repeated long enough in the same context, the brain transfers control from the willpower-driven areas to the basal ganglia, which manage automatic behaviors. Studies on behavioral automation at MIT show that after several dozen days of stable repetition, the brain no longer decides. It executes. This is the most important moment. Willpower does not need to become stronger. Motivation does not need to last forever. Behavior begins to take care of itself, like a program that has already been installed. I could be tired, bored, or unmotivated, but my body would still begin the familiar sequence. Sustainable discipline is not about straining yourself for a lifetime. It is a short phase where you repeat long enough, so that discipline is no longer required. Only at this point did I realize that what had destroyed all my previous efforts was not laziness, but an obsession with perfection. I always believed that if I couldn't do it fully or correctly, then it was better not to do it at all. And that thinking created small gaps, seemingly harmless, but large enough for everything to collapse. Japanese Zen does not teach perfect practice. It teaches uninterrupted practice. Whether you are tired, busy, sick, or mentally scattered, the practice continues in whatever form is possible, not to achieve results, but to keep the flow from ever stopping. A river may run shallow, it may slow down, but if it stops flowing, it is no longer a river. I began to apply this. On my worst days, I did the smallest version, less, slower, simpler, but never zero. And that continuity was what kept me going. It is not perfection that changes you. It is refusing to allow yourself to disappear, even for a single day. I used to think failure happened because circumstances were too difficult. But the truth is, I always lost at the same point, when something unexpected appeared. On days when things didn't go according to plan, I was forced to make decisions while tired and stressed. And in that moment, the brain always chose the easiest path, skipping. Zen monasteries do not allow this to happen. They do not wait for disruption and then discuss what to do. Every situation already has an answer. When A happens, they do B. No discussion, no delay, no emotion. When the bell rings, practice continues, in whatever space is still available. I learned to do the same. I wrote down every reason that had ever made me quit, and attached a fixed response to each one. Not a perfect solution, but one that was enough to continue. When the answer is decided in advance, the brain no longer has the right to negotiate. And when decisions no longer have to be made in chaos, discipline stops being fragile. In the end, the biggest change was not in the things I did, but in the person I became. I no longer saw myself as someone who was trying to be disciplined. I was simply someone who lived by that rhythm. Not every day was perfect, but every day was consistent with the same identity. I realized something very strange. When an action still requires effort, it does not yet belong to you. Only when an action happens naturally, without debate or self-encouragement, does it truly become part of who you are. Discipline is no longer something you have to remember. It becomes a reflex, and that shift makes other people uncomfortable, not because you are better than them, but because your presence reminds them of the promises they once abandoned. You do not need to convince anyone. You only need to live in alignment with your new identity. From that point on, you are no longer doing the right thing. You are the kind of person who cannot do otherwise. In the end, I understood that this was never really a story about discipline. Discipline was only the surface. What was truly happening underneath was an ending and a beginning. The end of the old version of me, the person who always started with excitement and then quietly quit, and the birth of another person, someone who no longer needs motivation to continue. Guji does not make you better in the usual way. It does not make you harder working or stronger. It does something far more radical. it changes you into a different person. A person for whom consistency is no longer a choice, but a natural state. When someone says that the way you live is not normal, that is not an insult. It is a sign that you have stepped outside the average. And if I had to choose between blending in with the crowd or becoming someone who cannot be broken, I know exactly what I would choose. By this point, you have probably realized something very important. You are no longer standing at the starting line. The fact that you listened all the way to this moment says that you are someone who refuses to stay trapped in the same old loop. You are not a person who is trying to change. You are the kind of person who has already begun to live differently, even if only through very small steps. You do not need to wait for more motivation. You do not need to become someone else. Everything you need is already here. What is changing is not your habits, but the way you see yourself. And when identity changes, behavior follows automatically. You are not someone who gives up easily. You are someone who comes back consistently every day. If this video helped you see your path more clearly, stay. Follow the channel so we can continue growing together. No noise, no rush, just a little steadier each day.